You are now live.
Can I get a motion for approval of our previous meeting minutes?
So moved.
Second.
You have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We have 4 pieces coming before us today. The first one is a resolution declaring it necessary to improve Copley Road between the termini of Mercer Avenue and Trigona Drive, South Maple Street between the termini of Trigona Drive and Glenwood Avenue, Manchester Road between the of East Avenue and Wilworth Road, and East Avenue between the termini of Vernon Odom Boulevard and Manchester Road by resurfacing and declaring an emergency. Mr. Little?
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of committee. This council passed legislation back a while ago. This is just the assessment portion. This is an ODOT project, about 4 miles of resurfacing from the termini that you mentioned in the legislation. This actually touches wards 1, 3, 4, and 9. So between Maple Street and then turns to Copley Road and over on Manchester Road. So this is a nice project, fully funded. We do have the assessment portion of this, and this starts that process. So construction of this resurfacing is slated for May of 2022.
Any questions from committee? Councilman Lombardo?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So again, to be clear, this does not, Mr. Little, this does not use any of the issue 17 money?
Issue 4, no. Most of it doesn't.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions from committee members? Any questions from council members? Seeing none, Mr. Little, what will be your pleasure?
Consent's fine.
Okay, can I get a motion for consent?
Motion for consent.
Second.
Second.
Got a motion and a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, ayes have it. Our next piece is an ordinance authorizing the service director and or purchasing agent after publicly advertising for bids to enter into a contract or contracts for the installation of security fencing adjacent to Lake Rockwell, authorizing payment therefore and declaring an emergency. Mr. Leto?
Thank you, Madam Chairman and members of the committee. We had this in the budget about 1.5 years ago, and we put it on hold due to COVID. Along the water's edge of Rockwell, there's stretches that we own from the water's edge 3 miles, whether east or west. Well, this one area, we didn't own any of the property, only a couple 100 yards. So the property recently was sold off on property that wasn't owned by the city. They're building some houses, and we really feel like to create that buffer, we need a lot of our Lake Rockwell is fenced. There is portions that are not, and this is one of the portions. So this is going to allow us to install fencing along the water's edge, just to kind of protect our watershed. So if there's nothing there, people tend to meander over and go fishing, or they'd want to put a boat in, and this will kind of keep that buffer. So.
Okay. Any questions from committee members? Any question from council members? Seeing none, Mr. Leto, what would be your pleasure?
Consent is fine, ma'am.
Okay, can I get a motion for consent?
Motion for consent.
Second.
I have a motion and a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Ayes have it. Next ordinance, authorizing the mayor or his designee to enter into, wait a minute, let me back up. I jumped safety, my apologies. Okay, here we go. Ordinance authorizing the purchasing agent or their designee to enter into a contract or contracts with the Community, University, and Education Purchasing Association, CUE, for winter roadway de-icing chemicals, including roadway salt, enhanced roadway de-icer, and liquid calcium and declaring an emergency. Mr. Little?
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. This is our annual purchase of salt. Some of you might remember back a little over a year ago, this legislation was for 2.7 million. This legislation is for 1.5. This salt, especially white, is the bulk of this legislation. It jumps all over the price and pricing. So in late 2020 or the price was $71 a ton for a white salt. It's dropped to 59. That's why the reduction in this price or this legislation. So the bulk of this is our white salt, and then what we call green salt is the lower temperature salt that's treated. And then the brine in this is just, we make our own brine. So we have storage tanks. We use the same white salt with city water. We have a brine maker. We make our own. We do not get any salt from brine from any other source. The calcium chloride we do get that in liquid form, and then we mix it with our brine to lower the temperature of the de-icing. Typically it'll lower it to -40. So we apply that to our white salt or our green salt to lower that temperature activization for the salt. Calcium chloride, we've used it for years. If we have the MSDS sheets, if there's any questions, but basically it's food grade material. It's the same calcium chloride they'd put in like a sports drink at a very low dose, obviously, to replace those carbohydrates that you lose. So it's the same thing. We mix it with, like I said, our brine to lower the activization of our salt. So with that, I will take any questions. I would ask if we could suspend the rules. We have found recently that the delivery of this is when you can get it and they have the drivers, let's get it. They have it mined, the salt under Lake Erie, it's ready to go, but as drivers are available, and we want to start stockpiling for winter. So with that, I will take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Leto. Do I have any questions from committee members? Councilwoman Holland?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Luddle, I'm sure you share my desire to put to rest concerns that crop up from time to time about exactly what we do and don't use to treat the roads. And I think you just provided a very thorough explanation, but let's make it abundantly clear for everyone who's listening and will have questions going forward that the city of Akron does not use any fracking byproducts or other hazardous substances to treat the roads during ice and snow conditions. Isn't that right?
That's absolutely correct. We were approached probably 5 or 7 years ago when I was in highway about using that product. And we thought, even though they said it's non-hazardous, we did not feel like it was appropriate to use on our roadways, and we did not entertain that.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Any other questions from committee members? Any questions from council members? Councilwoman Amobian?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Luddle, is the brine as dangerous in terms of creating potholes and stuff for us as salt, or what
Well,
causes?
basically, it's the same thing. It's the salt that's dissolved and it makes the brine. So it's this, we use the road salt to make the brine.
Okay.
The freeze thaw is not good. No, you're right. You know, when it hits the roadway and it melts and then it refreezes, obviously that solution getting into the roadway, that's when we start to see the potholes. There's not really any other way to do it. Okay. Best practices, unless you don't treat the roads at all. And we all know that's not, we know that's not feasible. So, unfortunately, the brine is the road salt, and we're making our own instead of buying it. So.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions from any committee or council members? I'm not seeing any. I just want to thank you, Mr. Luttle, for giving us the overview of the process. I too were contacted with those same concerns, and I think you clarified it in a way where we all understand it and know that this isn't something that's going to harm community. So with that, I am looking for suspension of the rules.
Motion for suspension of the rules.
Second.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Ayes have it. Last piece. Resolution expressing support for Rubber City Heritage Trail and grant administrators to award funding for its continued development and declaring an emergency. So, let me see, Councilman Fusco, are you speaking to this?
Yes, thank you, Chairperson Mosley. This is as we know, these trails take many years to get funded, to get built. This is one linking Goodyear to Firestone. It's traveling through four different, I think 3 different wards. It's going to create better access on the east side of town, to the downtown, to the University of Akron, to the hospitals. And it's going to it's going to be a brand new trail, and it's pretty cool working on something like this. I know Mr. Kamer and Mosley and Connor has been working and watching this. This is just simply asking for funding. Right now, we have applications out for funding, and this is just that, asking for funding so we could launch this and get it started. This is in support, I believe, of the first phase, which is kind of on the east side of the project, going behind Goodyear. And then it's going to travel down near East Exchange Street. And so we're just asking for support for this, and hopefully we'll get funded and get this thing started. It's exciting.
All righty, sounds good to me. Any questions from committee members? Any questions from council members? I'm not seeing any, so I would assume you would like suspension of the rules.
Yes, please, and thank you.
Absolutely. Can I get a motion for suspension of the rules?
So
Motion.
moved.
Okay,
Second.
in a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Ayes have it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. See, nothing else is coming before us. We are adjourned.
Our next committee of the day will be the Public Safety Committee, and that will begin at 2:15, so we have just a few minutes. Again, that's Public Safety. Those committee members are Kamer, Mosley, Lombardo, Malik, and McKittrick, and we'll get started here in just a few minutes. Thank you. Okay, it is 2:15, so if those on the Public Safety Committee could restart their videos. Again, those committee members are Kamer, Mosley, Lombardo, Malik, and McKittrick.
Thank you. I'd like to call the public safety meeting to order, please. All members are present. Can I get approval of the previous held minutes, please?
Motion to
Motion.
approve.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? All right, thank you. We do have one new piece in front of us today, and we also have a presentation from Guidehouse. Our new piece of legislation is an ordinance authorizing the mayor or his designee to enter into a contract or contracts without the formality of publicly advertising for bids with Stryker ProCare Services for the service and maintenance to the Akron Fire Department's chest compression devices and declare an emergency. And who do we have with us from the fire department? I see.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, District Chief Kaut, and with me to help answer any questions is Captain Caracas from our EMS Bureau.
All right, thank you. Can you give us a brief overview?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first of all, like to mention and thank Rebecca Advent for working with Captain Caracas and myself to review the service contract and draft the contract and make sure that the city's covered and we feel that all the bases are covered for any potential issues. So thank you to Rebecca Advent and the law department. So what we're looking to do here is to enter into a annual service agreement for 4 years with Stryker ProCare. They provide inspections and updates for our Lucas devices, which are chest compression devices, a very vital piece of equipment that we use in patients that are in cardiac arrest. They provide annual inspections, maintenance, and updates to the software and the devices. Why are we doing this? Well, we just had a 4-year contract that expired with the same company, expired this year. And we want to continue providing that annual maintenance service to that equipment that we have. A little bit about the Lucas devices. If you don't know, there are chest compression devices. They're extremely vital piece of equipment. It's imperative that we keep them in good working condition on a daily basis. They provide mechanical chest compression during cardiac arrest. Which has proven much more efficient than manual compressions, which we did for years. This is a great piece of equipment that increases the survivability for patients in cardiac arrest. Also allows for our members to focus on other care measures during cardiac arrest, so we don't have one person who's doing chest compressions. So with that, like I said, I have Captain Caracas here, and we'd be happy to answer any questions at this point.
Thanks, Chief. I appreciate that. I do have one question. Was the contract already expired, or is it still currently going on when we bring this legislation in?
Yeah, so when we started the process, we did have a contract in place, but the process taken a little bit longer than we expected, and we were out of contract for a few months, actually. So we're looking to get back under contract as soon as we can.
All right, thank you. Any questions from committee members? We do have Councilman Malik, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Chief Kaut. 2 questions. First, how many chest compression devices does the fire department have? And then the second, how does the cost on this 4-year contract compare to the previous 4-year contract?
That's a very good question. We have 17 chest compression devices, one on each frontline medical unit. And then, interestingly enough, as far as the finances are concerned, we're looking at it's about an $80,000 contract over 4 years to cover all 17 units. Comes out to a little over $1,000 a year per unit. This actually is less per unit than the previous contract that we had. So we feel that we're getting very good service at a very good price.
That's wonderful to hear. Thank you.
Thanks, Councilman. Any other questions or comments from committee members? The rest of the council? All right, I don't see any. Chief, obviously, I'm going to ask anyways. What's your pleasure?
Yeah, suspension of rules, please.
I figured that. Thank you. I appreciate that. I'll make that motion for suspension of the rules, please.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye.
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 Anybody opposed? All right. Thank you, Chief. I appreciate that. We'll pass that this evening.
Thank you.
All right, moving on. We do have a presentation from Guidehouse, and I'm not sure who would be the first person to start that presentation, but I'll call upon you, please.
Hello, Chairman Kamer. This is Tamika Rose from Mayor Horgan's office. Thank you all for letting us come in to present on the City of Akron's American Rescue Plan Act Youth and Community Violence Intervention and Prevention process and presentation. So I will be co-presenting with some of the members here in the mayor's office and Guidehouse. We can go to the next slide, please. So when the pandemic hit, Mayor Horgan was very active in conversations with the governor and with members of Congress and the US Senate. And he advocated very passionately about receiving funds that could help with youth and community violence prevention as a primary area of focus. This was after we received the CARES dollars, because those dollars were very stringent in how we could use them within the city. So when we got when the American Rescue Plan Act was passed and we found out that we could use these funds for youth and community violence prevention, we were very excited, especially since we had created the strategic plan, the Youth Violence Prevention Strategic Plan in 2019. And as you all know, we were unable to fully fund that plan. So we were very excited about this opportunity. So in order to put these funds to use as soon as possible, soon after the Treasury released primary guidance, we began developing the framework for a grant program that would support effective programming in the community to prevent crime and enhance the well-being of a generation of young people, not only burdened by the longstanding inequities and exposure to violence, but also the increased stress and harm from the COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide, please. So from there, as I said, Mayor Horgan was very, very excited. And what we did was on June 9th of this year, Mayor Horgan called a meeting with a sample of non-traditional grassroots organizations to discuss community efforts to reduce violence. There was a strong interest expressed in funding a pipeline to the community organizations who already do this work. And a preliminary screening process was created to solicit ideas. The original deadline of this opportunity was June 26th, and it was extended to July 9th. The administration received over 20 proposals. All organizations that we've been in conversations with understood that this exercise was meant to be a test of the ecosystem to see what non-traditional ideas and programs exist within the community that don't meet the qualifications for traditional funders within our community. Working with Guidehouse, we are working to ensure compliance with federal guidelines, which you will see in later slides. We are now prepared to launch the Youth Violence Prevention and Intervention Grant Program. A formal electronic application will be released later this week. All organizations, including those who sent in initial proposals, will have to submit a formal application. This funding will provide capacity building opportunities for grassroots organizations by requiring sustainability measures through the city's funding application. Organizations will be better prepared to qualify for traditional funding when these streams are no longer available. Next slide. Mitch, I'll turn it over to you, I believe now.
Let me find my mute button here. Thank you, Tamika, and thank you, Council, for for inviting me here. My name is Mitch Lindstrom. I'm a consultant on your Guidehouse team with the ARPA project. I'm also a seasoned public health professional, so I'm excited to talk to you about this particular issue. To reiterate, Guidehouse was hired early or late in the summer to translate the legislation, the ARPA and state and local fiscal relief fund legislation as it currently stands, monitor and support the city in justifying the programs that the city decides to move forward with, and develop systems to ensure that these dollars are tracked in support of meeting the U.S. Treasury's compliance guidance on this matter. So in this brief presentation, I'm hoping to run through the U.S. Treasury broadly, the U.S. Treasury's guidelines related as it relates directly to violence intervention and prevention projects, and share some of the specific details regarding what's going to be going on behind the scenes in terms of the considerations we need to take when assessing projects through our community grant program and in determining what we deem eligible.
Excuse me, Mitch, you're okay. We couldn't see your slides. Thank you.
Apologies there.
That's okay. We got it.
I like it. So there are many ways in which the state and local fiscal relief funds can support communities working to reduce and respond to increased violence due to the pandemic. The Treasury's guidance to date explicitly highlights 4 areas, and these 4 areas have been further reinforced by recent memos from the Biden administration on how to use the ARPA funding to support public safety and address increases in violence as a result of the pandemic. So first, we have investing in evidence-based community violence interventions. We're going to go into detail in this one a bit later on in the presentation, but broadly, this entails capacity building efforts for existing and novel programs and funding and training additional intervention workers. We also have investing in behavioral health services, including for individuals experiencing trauma exacerbated by the pandemic. Broadly, this incorporates supporting mental health services and substance use disorder services and/or programs that provide referrals to trauma recovery services for survivors of violent crime. Third, we have increasing law enforcement's capacity to respond to these increases in violence that communities are seeing. This can include things like investing in technology and equipment to allow law enforcement to better respond to these rises in gun violence. And third, we have expanding summer programming, employment opportunities, and other supports. The interim rule further targets and places emphasis on these programs geared towards teenagers and young adults. This includes providing and expanding summer education and enrichment programs, scaling up wraparound services, or providing or expanding existing employment services for young individuals. In all, this provides the city with a wide breadth of options to leverage that, for the most part, are synergistic with the community violence intervention plan that Tamika and Akron had put together in the past. With that all said, there are additional eligibility and reporting requirements that the U.S. Treasury has laid out, all of which we need to take into account when we assess individual projects. We need to look at things like what will these funds specifically be used for, and how do those uses relate to the COVID-19 pandemic. We need to look at who the intended target population of the project is, and specifically where are those services going to be offered in the community. We need to consider the use of evidence-based practices, and more importantly, what outcomes are expected and how will success be measured. And then lastly, when the city awards money to local organizations, we need to consider how we're going to support those smaller grassroots organizations that may have limited administrative capacity. And so I'm going to dive in a little bit deeper into each one of these points. So first off, when determining an expenditure category a potential project falls into is one of the first steps we have to take when conducting an eligibility assessment. The implications of assigning an expenditure category, although they do have many budgetary and reporting mechanisms that I'm not going to go into much detail here. What we want to focus on here is that depending on the expenditure category assigned, there are additional eligibility and reporting requirements for those projects. For example, many of the community violence intervention projects are going to fall under social determinants of health expenditure category. This means that it requires those projects to target populations that have been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic and require either the use of evidence-based practices or rigorous program evaluation. So when we talk about assessing the eligibility of specific projects, there are a couple ways we can, of which I lay out here, that we can justify and various expenditure categories we can assign to those. But that's step one. So this is an example here of, at a very high level, what we're going to be required to report out to the U.S. Treasury on each and every project we award a grant to. For example, for a youth mentorship program, we'll want to know specifically how that organization intends to spend those funds. Are they going to use the funds on staff time, for incentives to recruit youth to participate, for travel costs, for training? We'll need to assess whether this is the applicant has implemented this program in Akron before. Is it a new program or is it an expansion of services? And we'll also need to assess who the specific target population and who would be eligible for said youth mentorship program. Again, using youth mentorship as a broad brush example of some of the questions you'll find us asking in the grant application about what recipients intend to do with the funds. All of these questions are necessary, again, to meet federal reporting requirements. So I touched on location here. So as I mentioned, we need to look at who the intended target population of the project is and where those services will be offered. Recognizing that the disproportionate impact the pandemic-related recession had on low-income communities, the U.S. Treasury requires that cities report certain types of projects are targeted towards how they define economically disadvantaged communities. To incentivize cities and other recipients to use funds towards these programs, the U.S. Treasury created a list of activities and investments that will be deemed presumptively eligible when prioritizing these communities, many of which community violence interventions fall into. And so there are several ways that organizations can meet this requirement, all of which relate to two indicators: location, geographic location, and income. And so as you see represented on the screen, one of the foremost tools that the Treasury has laid out for cities to document this criteria is qualified census tracts. Those are census tracts or geographic regions in which 50% of households have an income less than 60% of the median gross income. This is something that's been used by HUD to target resources for some time. So services can meet this criteria by having their physical location of where those services are offered be located in a qualified census tract, having the majority of beneficiaries of their programming and services live within a qualified census tract, and also a number of income-related requirements that also can be used. And so we'll ask grant applicants whether they themselves and their service fall within a census tract, and or whether their services are going to be geared towards individuals living in qualified census tract or meeting those income requirements, and potentially have follow-up questions about how that might be tracked. Then we have the use of evidence-based practices. Now, I promised my colleagues, although this is my favorite topic to talk about, I recognize it's not everybody's favorite topic to talk about. But we need to assess whether evidence-based practices are being utilized. And if not, what additional resources we can use to support smaller grassroots organizations in evaluating their initiatives. So the US Treasury requires that prior studies of an intervention or prevention activity have demonstrated strong to moderate evidence of effectiveness. And there's a few benefits to this. One is straightforward in that prioritizing funds towards the most impactful and proven evidence-based program efforts should in theory lead to greater impacts towards the goals we laid out. Some well-known evidence-based violence interventions include Cure Violence, Operation Ceasefire, Coaching Boys into Men, and the Chicago CRED program. We also need to recognize that access to evidence-based literature and academic literature has not always been equal. And so there may be many organizations that have not assigned or have been implementing an evidence-based program. Well, these funds are an opportunity for us to build a portfolio of effective prevention and intervention approaches that might be based off of practice and or lived experience in your community. Oftentimes, grants now and foundations and federal funds require upfront that programs applying for funding align with an evidence-based program. Here, we have half of that requirement, but the Treasury is also very clear that an eligible use of funds is supporting these organizations to procure and pay for the evaluation of their own evidence. And this is something that gets at this idea of sustainability when these funds are no more, that some of these smaller organizations will have a portfolio of evidence that they could potentially use to apply and expand their services in the future when these state and local fiscal relief dollars are long and gone. Recognizing that access to this information is not always equal, Guidehouse has been working with the city and Tamika to proactively collect evidence-based solutions. That way we can support applicants in justifying their own projects and aligning them with evidence-based practices where applicable. As you can see from the categories represented on the screen, applicants to the community Akron's Violence Intervention and Prevention Grant Program can use funding to support a wide range of programs that address violence and in the community. Examples such as safe corridors and safe passage programs, which prevent incidents to and from school or other community centers. Street outreach and violence interruption programs that utilize credible community messengers. Providing referrals to partner agencies focused on meeting the basic needs of their participants, including education, employment, health, and other services, all the way to comprehensive reentry programs for returning residents. Ultimately, we are in the process of collecting additional resources, but we encourage all applicants and the city to use relevant evidence-based clearinghouses, among other sources, to assess the level of evidence. And this is something we hope to support the city and its applicants with as we move through this process. And so that brings us to subrecipients. These are individuals or primarily organizations that the city intends to dole out money to support these projects. There are a lot of organizations. It's clear for me in just my short time working with Tamika and the city that there are a lot of great organizations that are well positioned right now to do this work in Akron. However, we can't ignore the strings attached to this money, and subrecipients of this money will have to monitor their expenses and receipts for all dollars spent, be able to provide outcome-based programmatic data and comply with federal procurement and purchasing guidelines for the city to stay in compliance. So we want to ensure these organizations are successful and have been formulating various ways in which the city can support smaller organizations that may have a limited administrative capacity. This includes things like providing funding in intervals as opposed to large yearly lump sums, creating resource guides and holding informational webinars for awardees. This is something that Guidehouse is intending to do, hold and host regular meetings with any grant awardees to talk everything from compliance to challenges to sharing best practices of what's working for these organizations that the city has awarded money. And identifying fiscal or data sponsors and organizations that can support these smaller orgs with their evaluation and potentially their accounting. And that's a subtle wrap on the 4 items that I had to kind of jump through. Again, we'll be here for kind of the question and answer, but Tamika, I wanted to kind of kick it off back to the city here.
Thank you. At this time, there is an appendix in here. And so this is just an overview of the slide, a couple of slides ahead where Mitch talked about how we would have to report back to the federal government. So we would list the project and how much we would be spending on it, the project expenditure category, and the subcategory. So as I stated, we did have over 20 organizations express interest in receiving funds from the city to combat community and youth violence prevention. And of those that we created, that were created, when we interviewed them, and there was a subsection of a subgroup that interviewed all 20 organizations just to see where they were. And we, of those 20 organizations, about maybe $5 million we saw that could be put out into the community as soon as possible. But of course, we knew that we had to come to council and make sure that you guys were okay with us spending those funds after allocation. And so the criteria to receive the funding for the project include the applicant has articulated and demonstrated an appropriate use of the funds. The applicant has the ability to reconcile and monitor the use of the federal funds that are associated with the COVID-19 pandemic. Organizations must be a 501c3 nonprofit, faith-based organization, or healthcare organization. And the physical location must be within the city of Akron limits or serve 100% of Akron residents. And they cannot have any outstanding tax liens or judgments, excluding 2020 property taxes. So those are just a few, for lack of a better term, strings attached before we even look to award any funds. But later this week, we will be releasing the formal application for any and all organizations to formally apply for this opportunity. And then we will go through and score them and begin to release the funds within to the community. Next slide. Do you guys have any questions? What are we doing? Next slide. Annie, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Sure, I'll wrap things up here. As I hope everyone can see, we've been spending a vast majority of our time working through this grant program. We thought it was really pivotal that we can get this in front of the community sooner rather than later, especially to set them up for success in some of their programs that they want to apply for. So we did just want to mention, because it was in our original appendix, a few other initiatives that we were potentially planning on spending money in 2021. One would be the camera pilot project. This would be in the South of Exchange neighborhood. This is actually something that we've been working on for the majority of the year in partnership with Summit County and the University of Akron. So this is something that perfectly aligns with ARPA dollars. And we really saw this as a perfect opportunity to not only leverage great partnerships, but other federal funding to really pilot a great program that we can assure can be replicable in other neighborhoods in Akron. So that's really our hope, is if we can stand this up, get some of the details down, get some of the initial investments down, work through any issues that we see, make sure that we can connect to proper fiber. There is fiber over in that neighborhood that we can connect to for these cameras. So we see this as a really great opportunity, especially with such strong partners like the county and the university, to get this up and running. And then we can look at how we can really leverage this, into other neighborhoods as quickly as possible. So we did want to touch on that one. That's slated for approximately $1 million on our end. We're still getting engineers' estimates. It's looking like the project might be closer to 1.5. Both the county and the university are also contributing. So we see this as a really great opportunity to kind of leverage everybody's resources and funding to really get a good pilot going. And the other one that we're hoping to shift to, honestly, because a vast majority of our time has been gone towards the grant program. We do have the doorbell camera program in here in case we wanted to expend some funds this year. That's something that we, I know council members had ideas. We had ideas on how to do this. I know Guidehouse was looking into best practices and had some experience with best practices with other cities on how this could be leveraged. So we have this in here, but we're still kind of in the research phase of what that will look like. We're happy to take ideas here, but we know that's something that if we wanted to, we could implement pretty quickly if everybody kind of decided on a plan and wanted to move forward on that. But we don't have a ton of details yet. And I think now that once the grant program is really up and going, that we really like to shift some focus to the doorbell program as well. So we wanted to make sure we gave everybody kind of a basic numbers and kind of a top line view of what we were looking at, just at least through the end of this year for kind of some camera and some tech programs that might be able to get up and going. And I do believe that's the end of our slides, correct?
That is.
Okay.
Yes. Yep.
All right, thank you, Ms. Rose. What I'll do is I'll see if there's questions, and we'll go from there. I'll start with committee members first of the public safety. We do have first hand was Councilman Malik.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to everyone who presented. It's clear that an awful lot of time and effort has gone into this, and I think that there's a lot of exciting and important stuff here. I have a couple questions, but I want to make sure everyone gets a chance to talk. The first thing about kind of youth violence prevention, the violence prevention grant program, I know that in the 5-point strategy that the mayor released earlier this summer, one of the things going back to that youth violence prevention report was hiring a coordinator. I know that that's important to the implementation of that plan. How does that fit into this grant program? Are there thoughts about when that coordinator would be hired? How would they be kind of helping coordinate between these organizations? What does that look like?
Councilman Malik and Councilman Chairman Kamer, we are in the process. We are actually working on a job description to release to the public later this week to hire a violence prevention coordinator.
Okay, and in terms of the amounts that will be granted through this program, do we know roughly what amounts we're looking at for grants?
It is very fluid, but working with Guidehouse, we are going to be, they have created a NOFA. So Mitch, I'm going to turn it over to you because I don't have that right in front of me right now.
Yeah, that's a really good question, Councilman Malik. So we're thinking there's a few different ways we can think about it, but we want to make sure that it's in proportion to what an organization already has experience in managing, right? And so ideally, how we've looked at it in other communities is award amounts couldn't surpass more than 50% of what a nonprofit or a particular organization has already managed prior, without an additional fiscal sponsor, or maybe that's where we leverage something where we do more of a staggered release of those funds. Because we also don't want to limit from an equity standpoint some of these smaller organizations that have had limited access to capital before. So it's definitely something we're thinking about, and it would be a case-by-case basis. Luckily, well, the NOFO allows organizations to put a dollar tag and attach an up to a 3-year budget, a detailed budget. And so we would take those by a case-by-case basis, but from a risk profile stance, we usually look at no more than 50%. However, I think the city here has expressed a desire to make sure that these are released equitably, and that makes us want to kind of look back and think of some other ways that we can kind of structure this to make sure that, an organization or a nonprofit that only runs on $5,000 a year because they do a lot of their work in kind and historically have just provided it to the community at their own expense, can get more than a $5,000 or $2,500 grant. So that's where we're at on that end.
And I just
Thank
want
you.
to chime in really briefly about that. So any dollar that is going to be expended will be related to the violence prevention program that they're going to be implementing. So it'll have to be related to either a salary, a program, like some sort of actual expense related to implementing that program.
Thank you both for the thorough and thoughtful answers. Two other quick questions on the violence prevention. The $5 million that's for this year. Do we have a sense of future years? No, the $5 million is total.
Councilman Malik, that was our estimate of what we thought we would release this year. But the overall bucket for youth violence prevention from the entirety of the ARPA dollars is $20 million.
Okay.
Overall.
Are there thoughts about that remaining 15 million?
No, we don't have any idea.
Okay, but is there ideas that the grant program may continue in future years?
The grant program was ongoing and rolling, and we will be accepting grant applications until the money is gone.
Okay, and then the final grant program question, would it be possible to share the information related to the submissions that were made previously in the summer?
Yes, Dr. Joan Williams has all of those.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilman. I do see some hands raised, but they're not committee members, so I'll go on to Councilwoman Holland.
Thank you, Chairman. I believe my question is probably for Mr. Lindstrom, and this goes back somewhat earlier in the presentation, and I just wanted to make sure I understood a point. I could also take it offline if it seems better suited for that. And this had to do with reference to the HUD qualified census tract as an eligibility assessment tool. And I just wanted to make sure I understood this. I've done some work with HUD adjacent matters before in my own legal practice. And so what I'm trying to understand, is this an assessment criterion that we have selected as the city of Akron, or is this something that is imposed as a function of ARPA? That's the first question.
Definitely. Great question. This is something that the U.S. Treasury, the primary, to reduce administrative burden, they have called out in the interim final rule as a indicator that is readily accessible to many communities.
Very good. I think it's important for the public to understand this. And then I guess the companion question to that is, when we're using qualified census tracts as an eligibility assessment criterion, are we talking about specific location of the program or can we venture beyond that census tract in terms of service reach? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I'll kick it to Gabby just in case I miss a point here. But yes, ultimately, probably the most straightforward one is to go, hey, this particular mentorship program is physically located in a census tract, box checked, right? And
Right.
if not, if it's located outside of a service, qualified census tract, then we can look at other things. It doesn't mean that all recipients of this particular mentorship program have to live within a qualified census tract, but a majority. And so we would want to ask questions to the various organizations about if they track any of that information, and if not, how can we do that in an easy, accessible manner, just so we can make sure that it is documented. So they do say majority, and we want to wait until the final rule to stray too far from this, but they do leave it open to use other measures to assess disproportionately impacted. But it would be on the city to write that up. And so we could look at social vulnerability index or the child opportunity index by diversitydatakids.org that have other measures. But yeah, so I don't know if
Okay,
that helps.
very helpful. Thanks. And this is my second question, and my final question is unrelated. I just wanted to make sure I understood what Ms. McFadden said about the camera programs, which I understood to be temporarily deferred, backburnered for a minute. Am I understanding that correctly?
Well, we're much further along in the pilot program with the county and the university. That will most likely be happening this year. At least, we're definitely in process and coordination. We're in the middle of kind of an intergovernmental agreement to do that. The doorbell camera in whatever fashion that looks like, we're kind of trying to hop to next after we set up this grant program, which we're at the end of. So we wanted to include some funding for that, just in case that is something we could start to set up quickly and just pass out cameras if that's the way we wanted to go. But I think we need to talk more about best practices, get feedback from council members and Guidehouse, and see where we want to proceed next with that.
Okay.
So we don't have
you.
a definite vendor or anything in mind yet.
Okay, thank you. That's all I
Sure.
had. Thank you
Yep.
very much.
Thanks, Councilwoman. Councilman Neal?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Couple questions. And Mr. Lindstrom, you alluded to some of them because you used the term equity several times. And my concern is, first, if you can, we've been having this discussion on council. If you can share what the definition you're using for equity in this context, and then what are the metrics to determine equitably the areas that are selected? I think I know what those are, but I think it's good that as a council, we understand those metrics. And then what are the metrics that are used to select the organizations that will be receiving funding so that we can make sure that that is all equitable? That's my first question.
Yeah, and that's a great one. And I'm going to kick to Gabby here because there is a racial equity component that we've been planning on the back end for all projects. And so, Gabby, if you could answer, and I can fill in the blanks to the specifics of how that might apply to our community violence intervention program.
Definitely. It is a really good question. And we do think about equity on kind of different paths. So when we think about racial equity specifically, and this is a little bit of a preview of the racial equity framework that we're working on, we're really thinking about how can you measure harm that's been done in specific communities. So how can you measure that, how you can make it quantifiable, and how can you start to begin to address the root causes of those harm through the use of these dollars. So when we think about racial equity, when it comes specifically to violence prevention, thinking about the disproportionate amount that certain communities, particularly communities of color, Black communities, have seen inside of their neighborhood. What's the impact on that? What does that mean from everything from the impact of what it means for children growing up in that environment, but also to the ability of people to kind of secure jobs, and all of those types of things. So we know that violence impacts people in multiple ways when thinking about the racial equity aspect of it. One of the things that we have built in, though, to this particular program is this idea of equity that that Mitch actually alluded to a couple of times, is the importance that just because a organization hasn't necessarily received a large amount of funding in the past or hasn't been able to take a program to multiple neighborhoods because of funding restrictions and that type of thing, that doesn't mean that a program is not successful. And so oftentimes we find that the programs that are usually most related to the community and kind of closest to the community are limited by the amount of funding that they can get. And there's a number of reasons for that. Some of them do come down to a racial equity issue as well there. We want to make sure that when we are looking at these applications, we are giving people a pathway forward where they can apply for these dollars, but also apply for them in a way that will set them up for success when these dollars run out. And one of the things that Mitch did mention, I'll let him go into it a little bit more, is that this idea of evidence-based outcomes. So there are a number of violence prevention programs throughout the nation that have proven success records. Those programs are kind of what we consider evidence-based. Now, the programs that Akron might have inside of its city may not necessarily be based off of those same models, but may still have results that are worth exploring and expanding to different parts of the city. And part of what we are hoping to provide, and what we have to provide actually, because of the requirements with this legislation, are evaluators. So if a nonprofit says, we think that we have a really great program, we've seen some success based off of maybe a smaller pilot that we've done, we would like to apply for some of these dollars, we would tell them as well that they have to use a portion of the dollars or budget out what a portion of this budget might look like in order to hire an evaluator who can measure those results. And what that will mean for that organization after these dollars run out is that they are going to actually open themselves up to get different sorts of funding that require evaluation and require evidence-based outcomes. So we're really excited about the ability to use these dollars to set up nonprofits in the future once these dollars run out, to be more successful in getting additional funding and basically increasing their sustainability. And so Mitch, if you had anything to add to that.
I wanted to create space for Councilman Neal to reply, but I'm happy to go into some details around, potentially what that racial equity kind of piece, how that would show up on a scorecard for applicants, and or elaborate on what I would consider practice-based evidence, which is that idea of like these interventions and innovations that are curated based on lived experience. But Neal, or Councilman Neal, apologies, I wanted to create some space for you to ask a follow-up question or two.
Well, thank you. And this is something that we could work on later, but equity, yes, race equity is a part of it, but it's deeper than that. There's equity between organizations. Usually the money goes to the same traditional institutional organizations. They do good work, but if they had the answer, we wouldn't be at this Zoom meeting right now. So I appreciate you saying we want to look at those organizations that have smaller budgets and see. So equity lens for that. It's not just race when you get deep down into it, because we're doing this kind of analysis right now in my ward. There's homelessness, but it is amplified within the LGBTQ community amongst young Black men. Okay, so equity is holistic, but having these metrics so that when we say it, everybody understands what we're talking about is critical. And we need anybody that's talking about equity in this city. It can't mean one thing for Guidehouse, another thing for council, another thing for the administration. So we need you to help us form a solid definition, so that when we select an organization or an area, we know that equitable metrics, which we all comprehend and understand, were taken. And this is a new space for everybody. And so when we are willing to say that, hey, we don't have the answers, but collectively, we're going to get to the answers, that's how we can address this issue. So I appreciate that. Look forward to having deeper discussion with you on that. My other question is this. I know these conversations are being had with organizations, and this is a concern you heard from this council as a whole. All these organizations, everything is great, but there are only 10 people represented to speak on behalf of these communities. And that's each one of these ward council persons. And so my concern is that the process to this point has excluded our voice. Because if you were to come to Ward 4 and talk to me, I could tell you right now, this process that you're taking, we are going through. Matter of fact, we came to the city a year ago, last month, when the mayor and the then Police Chief Ball asked for the community's help, and we presented a plan that we're working on, and we're in partnership with Akron Public Schools and the interfaith community. And so, my concern is, again, being collaborative, understanding what we mean when we say the word collaborative. And this isn't, you guys are walking into this space. So, but I'm just saying, these are some of the things we have to look at, because no matter who you talk to, there's only one person elected to speak for Ward 4, that's me. There's only one person elected to speak for Ward 2, that's Mr. Lombardo. One person to speak for Ward 6, that's Mr. McKittrick. If we are not at the table, then this process is going to be skewed. So I want us to keep that in mind, that we have to, because we know our communities intimately. We know our school systems intimately. And as we're doing this process, one of the things that I want us to keep in mind, that especially since we're talking about youth, we've got to be walking in concert with our school system. We don't want to be duplicating things with the school system and with the city. We want to make sure we leverage our dollars as much as possible. And since we're talking about health, the city transferred its health department over to the county. So the county with their dollars need to be a part of this discussion as well. That's just my thought. And then, I have some other things, but I think I've used enough of my time. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilman. Good questions. I'll go on to Councilwoman Mosley.
Thank you, Chairman Kamer. I have quite a few questions. I'm not sure who to direct them to, so anyone who could answer them, I'd appreciate it. I thank you for the work that has been done on this proposal. I do hope that we copy of this in our email so we can look at it a little more intimately. I just want to get a breakdown of the $1 million share with the University of Akron in this pilot. Are we stating that we're taking $1 million from the ARPA funds to go into this pilot? That's my first question.
So as of right now, Councilwoman, we're still getting engineers' estimates for the cost of a pilot program. So as of right now, our initial estimates are 1.5 million total. But again, this is a good opportunity. Both the county and the university are going to be putting in funds, roughly 500 each. So we might go a little over because we are going to be owning some of those assets. If we do go a little bit over that, we just wanted to make sure we have enough to get us through this year to get this up and running. But again, and that depends on the engineer's estimate. So I think there's a lot to be determined on that in terms of exact numbers. But the initial, commitment was roughly 500 each to at least get it up and running, but with some wiggle room in case we needed to go over that. Because again, we will own these poles and own these assets. So the burden on us might be a little bit greater, but that is to be determined. But
okay, and that goes into my second question. I know we're talking about fiberware and the fiber optics as to why the University of Akron area was chosen for this pilot. I want to know from either Guidestone or the administration, what did the research show as far as fiber goes and the top 3 crime indexes in the city of Akron? Was that even looked at, is my first question. And if it was not looked at, I would hope that we would address this immediately, because when we talk about the crime index, we spoke with the chief when he was on a call with us a few weeks back, and they talked about the top 3 areas. The University of Akron was not in there. I commend the University of Akron for stepping up immediately because of the shooting that happened down there. But when we talked about the top 3 areas where crime is running rampant, that was not mentioned. So I am hoping that with this funding, that we will make sure that we are addressing this fiber optics issue that clearly maybe these top 3 do not possess, because crime is not going to wait for us to get our fiber together. It's not. So in the meantime, I'm hoping that we will set aside money for that. We will go and do the research in those areas and see what that looks like, what the fiber where it looks like in those areas, because I understand they're saying research had to be done, but this incident happened at the university in September, and we already have money set aside to put cameras up everywhere. But we've all been talking about the crime in our wards for years, and it's only getting worse. So I'm hoping that we will be very intentional when we start talking about fiber optics, when we're coming through 3, 4, and 5, which are the top 3 that are getting hit the most with crime, at addressing those. That concerns me greatly if that has not been researched, and we say Akron U has the fiber. Well, we know they're going to have the fiber. It's a university, but we need to make sure the neighborhoods have it as well. My third question is, I really hope that we will make attempts to expedite the Ring cameras sooner rather than later. I appreciate that there's $40,000 set aside, and maybe we're going to deal with nonprofits at distributing those. But again, crime is not going to wait for us to put Ring cameras on people's houses. So if we're going to put a pilot program at the University of Akron, I do hope that we will secure these other wards with some cameras in the meantime until we figure out this fiber issue, and not just in 3, 4, and 5. Everyone is being hit with crime across the city in every ward. And we all have requesting Ring cameras across the city, not just in 3, 4, and 5. So I really hope that we can be really intentional about, while we're addressing one, that we take care of the other while we're trying to figure out a plan for this fiber optics in those wards. Thank you.
Thank you,
So-
Councilwoman.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Annie. Go ahead.
Sorry about that. Just 2 quick things, and I see Captain Harding is still on the call too. I'll defer to him as well. But I do want to say this is something that we've been working on with the university a majority of the year, probably since late winter, early spring. So, and again, I think we've been intimately involved because this is a pilot project that we wanted to make sure we could leverage and move out quickly into other neighborhoods. We're by no means saying that this area is the top crime area, and we're very aware of that. But again, I think this is something where we can really leverage and get the most bang for our buck in terms of doing a really great pilot program, and that we could replicate by any means. That fiber that's down Exchange is ours. And I think this is something that we're in partnership in tandem with Fair Long Gig, and broadband is allowable under ARPA expenses. So that is a huge push for us to try to figure out how to lay fiber in down all the neighborhood corridors and where we need it most in terms of public safety efforts. So we really hope that we can get this pilot program up and running quickly, so then we can indeed replicate as early next year to try and lay fiber and get this into other key areas. So Captain, I don't know if there's anything that you wanted to add to that.
No, thank you. I thought you did a good job on that. We've been in conversation with the university and the county for about a year now, talking about running a pilot program. The universities wanted to run one as well as us. So we looked at that area there to try to get some new technology. There is fiber along the edge of that, which does make the project a little bit easier, cheaper, more convenient, and easier to run. But we're still working with some vendors on what is the right technology to throw there that we can implement throughout the city. So
And I just want to say really very quickly for Guidehouse's part, we looked at the eligibility of this program and looked at the legislation, and we really are working on behalf of the city and city council. So you guys can let us know which projects you guys are already in the midst of doing and seeing how we can use this legislation to fund that. And that's where Guidehouse plays a role. So we really, we don't make any decisions. It's all about, city and what they want to move forward with. And we just kind of help figure out those eligibilities and bring up other kind of examples that we've seen nationwide.
Yeah, I was going to add the benchmarking piece. So the doorbell camera project, for example, there's many cities and municipalities that have been implementing that. And so looking at those and how they've structured those and what their criteria are has been something on the back end we've been starting to collect.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilwoman Omobian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess some of my questions have been asked, but here's my concern. You start throwing words around like evidence-based programming, agencies that may have the history of doing things in the neighborhoods, but may not have the capacity to do this, and you want to do some capacity building. Here's my real concern, is the same thing that happened with the PPE dollars. Those organizations who could quickly put these proposals together because they have the infrastructure to do it quickly. And then those restaurants and other small businesses that was left out in the cold, I see this happening with this. For years now, we've been talking about the crime in 3, 4, 5, particularly in Ward 5. It seems to me that if you're coming out the gate with something to do a pilot, it would be in that ward more so than the University of Akron. But again, when you look at the players and the partners, all of those partners have the resources to put something together quickly, to come up with dollars to partner with the city, but you're not hitting the area where we need the pilot programs the most. So, as we talk about this, these are the concerns I have, is that you're going to get to the agencies that have been doing the work for the longest, but not necessarily having the infrastructure to address the need where the problems are. Okay, we have a lot of violence happening in our inner city communities. That is where we need to go to find out, how do we replicate something that we put in those communities to the University of Akron and other parts of the city? I mean, that is what I would think you would want to do to get some kind of data to help us spread this. When we talk about evidence-based programming, I mean, there are a lot of organizations that are doing some good work, but they don't have that evidence-based framework. So who's going to help them pull the training together that's needed? Collect the data. You talked about hiring a person to do the research or the training or whatever. Are you going to have one person to do this for a number of small organizations? Or are you talking about each organization hiring their own person? There's some real concerns here, and I really want us to really think through this. This is an opportunity for us to address, and we keep talking about, we use the word equitable and equity. Keep in mind, every neighborhood doesn't need the same thing. And when I think of equity, I think of what is needed in Ward 5 versus Ward 1 versus Ward 8 versus other parts of the city. And so we need to really talk strategically about what you're talking about doing. And, the University of Akron, okay, they have the resources, they have the staffing, they have the researchers, they have everything they need to help put a program together quickly. But is that where the most need is? And that is what concerns me, is that we start doing things in neighborhoods where the greatest need is not there yet, And I realized what happened several weeks ago at the University of Akron space was tragic for all of us. But that's happening in Ward 5 almost every day, or Ward 3 in different parts of the city. So someone needs to help me understand, why aren't we starting in those areas where the greatest need is?
So, Councilman Amobian, I will try to help answer that question. So first, in terms of evidence-based for the grants, the mayor was very explicit in the fact that he did not want the usual suspects to be to reach out. He wanted to go to those individual organizations that are on the ground. So grassroots organizations such as Dreams Academy and Fallen Fathers. So those are some of the individuals that we reached out to, that we talked about, that we will be assisting, as Mitch highlighted, that we will be assisting them to make sure that they are building capacity building. During the interview sessions, we did ask them, would they be open to technical assistance? And we will be able to assist them. And as the program rolls out and we put contracts together in our quarterly reports to council, we will inform you guys of how the program is being set up and with whom. In addition to that, and I don't know if Annie or even some of the officers on the call know, we attempted to get funding through the capital budget last year for cameras across the city of Akron, and it was turned down. We went with Summit County and the United Way, and it was turned down because it was looked at by our state senator as being big brotherish. So I think it would be helpful for us to, we will do all we can to move out into other communities, but it did not look like our state senator was very open to the fact of cameras in our community. So I think that is a conversation that we would need to have to do that, because that was pulled off of the table for the capital budget.
And I just wanted to say a couple more things about the evidence-based. So the evidence-based requirement is actually a requirement put in by the federal government. So it's not something that the city is requiring or anything like that. It's just a part of, in order to make sure that we are spending these in an eligible fashion, the federal government is making sure. Now, there's two ways. There's, you can use nationally recognized evidence-based practices, or you can go with an evaluator. And that was one of the things that you brought up. So for these smaller organizations who maybe don't have the same capacity or the same understanding of evidence-based outcomes, they are going to be able to actually get include funding in their budgeting for a researcher or an evaluator who can help them with doing that process. Now, a lot of our organizations nationwide, what we're seeing a lot of cities and counties and states do is they're looking to their universities either locally, because this is a really big opportunity for the education area as well, to learn about what is most effective in these communities, what's going to be most impactful. And so we get, from a perspective of, we get a chance to look at different interventions, see what's most impactful, measure those outcomes, and then continue that funding to see, okay, there's an amount of time that takes to start up something or to spread the word. So this is a really great opportunity for those organizations, because the reality is that they're currently left out of being able to be funded because they don't have a history of those evidence-based outcomes. So what we can do over the next 3 years or so is give them that history, and then that's going to open them up to actually get funding in the future and become sustainable. So that's really an important thing that I really want to drive home. And then on the other point that you made, as far as kind of being ready, these larger organizations have a history, they have their application ready to go, they can have someone stay up all night and just turn it in the next day. This is actually going to be a rolling process, and we're going to keep it open so that we can hear those great ideas that are coming from the community. And also we're going to make sure any funding that we're doing, we're going to track the locations and the impact of where they intend to implement their programs. And we're going to make sure that we're looking at that, again, from an equitable standpoint. We're not going to say, oh, you know, all of these dollars are ending up in this zip code and that's okay. No, we're going to make sure that we have a discussion and present that to council as well, so that you guys can see, you know, this is how many dollars went to this zip code, or this is how many dollars went to this ward. So you guys have an understanding of that, and you can understand the impact of the dollars. I must have said something wrong because a lot more hands went up. So we'll see what happens.
Tamika left. No, I'm just
Mr.
kidding.
Chair, excuse me, Mr. Chair, I just want to follow up real quickly.
Sure.
So
please.
as you are looking to do a pilot program, why not look to do one in a neighborhood as well as the University of Akron area? I mean, you can do 2 pilots, you know, one that we've been begging for years, and then you can do the University of Akron. I don't see a problem with that. The other thing, if you could drop some of those evidence-based programs that you keep referencing in the chat, or to someone downtown who can send it out to council, that would be extremely helpful, because I like to see what you're talking about when you talk about evidence.
They're highlighted in the presentation. So we'll make sure to get that presentation over to you. And then I'm sure Mitch has a lot more of them, because this is his background as kind of this type of research and everything. So we can share as many of them as you would like. And
I was going to say, I'll do you one better. I'll make sure there's clickable links in some of those PDFs and put it in a document and send it over to the city, and they can get that to y'all. I just want to highlight that with some of these organizations might be implementing evidence-based practices and not even know it. And so that's why a lot of these mentorship programs and after-school programs actually will fall well within the CDC's definition of youth violence prevention program, evidence-based programming, and they might not even know it. And so it's on our behalf of the city to help some of these organizations build up their own justifications, not only for this bucket of funding, but potentially as they approach other foundational and governmental funders.
Thank you. Councilwoman Connor.
Mitch, I'd like you to talk to me a little bit about the census tract. What happens to those neighborhoods that are outside of the census tract? You know, if one ward can't get everything, is every ward going to get something?
Yeah, definitely. So that's definitely a concern we're thinking about. And so I want to raise up that location, and geographic location was one of the eligibility requirements there. There's also, we can do other targeting based on income in neighborhoods that might not qualify as a census tract. But then we would look at, you know, does that program or that project have income requirements, or potentially are there other variables that we could track that could articulate that this target population has been disproportionately impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic.
Okay, I just want to make sure that we're all inclusive. You know, 24 neighbors is a lot of neighborhoods to hit with money.
Definitely. And I also want to highlight that not every expenditure category. So we were talking about community violence interventions, and I know we have a few more meetings to talk about the others, but not every expenditure line requires this disproportionately impacted QCT requirement.
Yeah, I understand that there's 6 buckets and some will get out of one bucket and some out of another. That's fine. I just want to be sure that when we talk about being outside of a zone, that doesn't disqualify anybody.
And I just want to qualify it too. This is a proxy. So it's just one way, like Mitch mentioned, one way of measuring very easily and very simply if the program qualifies in this area. But to Mitch's point, another way to do it might be we ask people who are a part of the program to provide their zip code or to provide income or those types of things. And then I will also say there are certain things that even when we think about from a geographical perspective, if you can say, hey, the violence in this, crime rate, we've seen in this particular neighborhood go up over the course of the pandemic. If you have, whether it be, police reports or something like that, we can do a deeper dive for sure. It just takes a little bit more work. And so when we kind of highlighted that, it's just an easy proxy. We're definitely willing to do the work and make any justification that, again, aligns with the purpose and the intention, which is we want to make sure that we are preventing crime in places that have been affected by crime.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilwoman Holland.
Thank you. I'll try and make this quick. Within the past month, my estimate would be that the University of Akron has at least 3 or 4 times publicly pledged to put a minimum of $1 million towards a camera surveillance program. And I'm not really sure who this question goes to, but since we are announcing here a partnering with the county and with the university for a camera pilot program, is it the present understanding, and can I take this back to Ward 1, that the university's pledged participation is still at the $1 million amount?
I mean, that we'd have to verify with them. Again, we're still looking at final estimates. I mean, I think there's an engineering, firm trying to assess what that looks like right now. So I can't attribute that their whole $1 million is going to go to the camera program. Maybe there's other instances that they want to use that over there. I know they're really trying to up the safety efforts. I know they were hiring additional police officers. So I can't speak for the university, but we've been working in tandem on this program, and we're all committed to kind of put equal funding towards it. But that final number has not been determined yet.
Okay, that's fair. Let me ask it another way, Ms. McFadden. What's our current pledged amount toward that pilot program?
Hypothetically 500, but again, I think we have to worry about maintenance of poles and cameras and everything else after the fact. So we were thinking just closer to $1 million just to make sure we could cover ourselves for this year.
Okay, and I've expressed over the past few months some interest in camera programs. And my interest came about because I'm interested in privacy issues for citizens. And it's come to my attention that some systems are better than others. Somebody mentioned something about a state senator being concerned about this being Big Brother, and I don't really know what to say about that. I think that there's a general view that we need to do everything we can to keep the community safe. All of that said, I guess I want to ask, maybe it's Captain Harding, have we picked a camera system, or Ms. McFadden, it might be you, when we're talking about this joint project near the University of Akron campus with the county, the university, and the city, have you settled on a system?
No, I can answer that one. We have not settled on one system. One positive right now is we use a company called Milestone for our video management solution for the city, for city-owned poles. The university is looking at going to Milestone as well, but that's just the video system that they're talking about using. But the software and technology associated with that has still not been decided on yet. There's a lot of people in that space. I know NOLA was one you've mentioned and some others as well, but we have not decided on who we're going to use for all of those pieces yet.
Okay, is Milestone the engineering firm you were referencing?
No,
Ms. McFadden?
Milestone is the software that we currently have allowing people to view the camera. So if another provider, the university, was on Milestone as well, it would be easier to share those camera feeds.
Sure.
Without getting too technical, that's working pretty expensive. If we have to share those feed multiple places, how do we store it? How do we get power? How do we get access or internet access, fiber in those areas as well? So
Sure.
we have not decided on one. And one positive about this program, we're partnering with them, would be the ability to maybe target one type of technology and still look at other providers in different parts of the city, and then go back and compare those to see which one gives us the most value. So,
and would it be your desire or intention or plan to bring back, shall we call them the finalists, for some discussion or consideration with council? Would that be desirable or of interest to you?
I think that's a good idea.
I think so too. One of the things that is really clear is that not all the systems are created equally. And that, one of the things we really want to do is give people a sense of safety and confidence about the accuracy of the cameras, the speed and efficiency of the technology. And we also want to know that our men and women in blue are happy with the choice and feel that it's a good tool and one that they can respond to happily and readily. So thanks for your answers. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Let's see, Councilman Malik.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just had a couple of similar questions about camera programs. I'll try to make these brief. So when we talk about the partnership with the university and the county, is there a rough sense of how many cameras we're looking at? Is it a dozen? Is it 100? Is it 500?
Roughly 50 cameras currently. We've also talked about going with license plate readers along the edge of that, and that would be part of that 50 cameras that we've looked at.
Okay, and so when we look at, $500,000 or $1 million or the total 1.5 million, that seems like a lot for 50 cameras. So that includes also a significant cost, and that is actually laying fiber. Is that right?
There's a lot of costs can be associated with that. Fiber could be one, power to those, and a place to mount those cameras in the neighborhoods, whether those are installing our own private poles or partnering with others in the area for installation of those poles as well as any software associated with that, from the use of milestone, license plate reader technology, and the networking and storage associated with those as well. So,
okay. And then, kind of going off of that, I kind of agree with Councilwoman Holland's concern about privacy. Certainly, there's value in camera technology and surveillance technology, but also there's a concern as well about over surveillance, about Big Brother, and about privacy. And there's I think those concerns are very real. I would just encourage, as we go forward, that there be some mechanism by which we consider that and have public input. Whether it's, when we did the body camera policies, there was a citizen committee that helped provide input there. Maybe something like that would also be helpful here, especially if it's something we're going to be looking at doing citywide. It totally makes sense to have, cameras and license plate readers that would help reduce, gun violence and homicides. It makes less sense if those are, going to be catching, college kids buying small amounts of marijuana, things like that, right? So just want to echo that I think that is a totally reasonable concern. And I hope that it's, that concern is represented in whatever comes forward with the university and with the county. The final point, just want to make very briefly, is that our policy intern for City Council has also been working on a lot of research about camera programs, particularly doorbell camera programs. So hopefully we can have, maybe Dr. Williams can help connect with Guidehouse and the other groups, because he does have a lot of information. I think it would be helpful in terms of, as we think through the doorbell camera program. Thank you.
Thanks, Councilman. Let's see, Councilman Neal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just wanted to say, as we're looking at this, and Mitch spoke to this, we need to be thinking about the sustainability of whatever we do. And we're talking about technology. I don't know if we've ever had a talk comprehensively of just, the technical infrastructure, smart city technology. I know we've implemented something where people could use their phones to send in service requests. And now we're talking about the Ring doorbell cameras. Really doing an overlay and looking at what smart city technology looks like and how all this stuff works together. We don't want to, I don't know, I'm going to say for myself, we don't want to have 5 different remotes that we've got to push when we could get one remote. Well, when you really know what you're doing, you go out and you buy a unit, you know how to connect all that stuff together. When you don't, like me, you buy something, and you got 50 different remotes, you're trying to figure out which remote you got to push to get this to work. We don't want to be like that as a city. And so I think we need to work with our police department, the service department. We need to work with those who work with technology, and I'd be happy to bring in IBM. They worked with the city and developed a smaller city, smart city model so that we could look at what this looks like. And then from a sustainability standpoint, and we've talked about this before, the next time someone comes and before we give away a building and whatnot, maintaining air rights, maintaining mineral rights, but maybe looking at some type of fee that covers this kind of expense that's now going to be a part of our infrastructure for the future. So I'm just saying, Mr. Chairman, that we need to take a holistic look. We don't have a tech committee, but we do need to take a look at that holistically. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. You used to be on a tech committee. You used to chair one.
Yes, sir. We need to bring it back.
I was on that committee. I remember that. All right, thank you. Right now, I do not see no more hands raised. So I'll go to Miss Rose to see if she's got anything to add before we adjourn.
No, Councilman Kamer, I don't have any other comments. Does anyone from the mayor's office have any other comments? We're good. Thank you for your time today.
All right, thank you, everyone. I appreciate that. With that, I will adjourn the meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Also, to let you know, I did get, a copy of that presentation, and I did forward that.
Thank you all for your time. Appreciate it.
Sorry, I didn't unmute myself. We'll move right into the Budget and Finance Committee. Those committee members are Freeman, Amobian, Malik, Baylor, and Lombardo. Are you ready, Mr. Chair?
Yes, if I can have just a moment, thanks.
Sure.
All right. It is 3:41 p.m. I'd like to call to order the Budget and Budget Finance Committee. And if we could please, for the record, have a roll call, Ms. Bibiano.
Freeman.
Aye.
Amobian. Malik.
Aye.
Baylor. Councilman Baylor, I can see that you're here. Can you hear us?
Would it perhaps be appropriate for us to take a few minutes, given that the last meeting ran pretty long, and give people a chance to come back to the computer?
Mr. Chair, did you want to give them a minute to join?
Actually, I cannot because of the length of the last meeting. It's kind of pushing me right now time-wise. So I apologize for that.
Lombardo?
Here.
You do have a quorum with 3 members.
Okay, very good. And I need a motion to accept the minutes from the last meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Motion a second. All in favor, let it be known by saying aye.
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 Okay, very good. And we have one new item. And Sarah, I'm going to ask if you could please read that in for me.
An ordinance amending ordinance number 74, 2021, passed March 22nd, 2021, which established the annual appropriation for the current expenses, other expenditures, and the capital outlays of the city of Akron for the fiscal year ending December 31st, 2021, and declaring an emergency.
Very good. Thank you. Mr. Fricker, were you going to be addressing us?
Yes, I will. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So
you.
this is our first amendment to the annual appropriation for 2021. We distributed a memo via email earlier today, which you all should have received. I'll go through a few highlights of that. We are not seeking passage of this today. So, council is free to, review that and ask whatever questions they might have. We can address some of those questions next week if necessary. I'll just cover a few of the highlights. So a lot of these are adjustments to various funds. Some of them are to add for grants that we've received throughout the course of the year, which is a common occurrence. A big one that you'll see is in our airport fund. We received a grant for a runway project there. And then there's a couple other minor grants throughout the various funds that we have. Some of these are also just adjustments to move money from the labor category to the other category or vice versa, just to get the dollars into the correct account category that they might belong in. I know that there is a lot of conversation around the funds being appropriated for the ARPA project. So on the memo, those are designated in section 10. Which kind of outlines what those expenditures are. And I'll share a spreadsheet that has a little bit more detail than even what is provided in the memo, if I can do that right now. Okay. So can everyone see my screen right now?
Yes.
Okay, so this is a breakdown of the amount that we allocated for the ARPA project, which is about $6.3 million for the rest of 2021. So we kind of came to that amount based on, the estimate of what we think the monthly spend will be. And this represents, roughly 2 months of expenditures. Obviously we've outlined a few key areas that were just talked about during the previous presentation. You see right at the top there, the surveillance cameras, the $1 million that we talked about in the previous presentation. We also have, some expenditures designated for the Akron Cares program, for the lead service replacements, for the Financial Empowerment Center. And then we have some buckets set up for small business assistance, new housing, the compliance consulting, which is primarily the Guidehouse contract. Some dollars for the housing rehab that we plan to do, and then also the bucket for violence prevention. So this represents the expenditures that potentially could happen for the rest of 2021. It's likely that in many of these areas, the expenditures will not reach that level. So we're appropriating, what we think would be possible for the rest of the year. This represents less than 5% of the total ARPA award dollars. So $6.3 million is about 4.4% of those dollars. And then down on the bottom, you can kind of see the breakdown. You can see that the vast majority of the dollars are designated in the other category. We have put a little bit of money into the wages category, potentially if, say, for the lead service program, if we ended up having any staffing costs that would be needed to facilitate those lead service installations, as well as some personnel that we might need to manage some of the housing rehab projects. Again, I think it's probably unlikely that we would actually hire any new personnel for those specific projects before the end of the year, but we wanted to include those dollars just in case that occurs quicker than we think. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
And obviously we're not going to pass this today, but best place to direct questions would be to Ms. Donnell, to you throughout the week here?
Yes, either to Ms. Donnell or to myself, yes.
Okay, very good. Okay, let me go to Ms. Amobian.
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you. Go to the point where you talk about Guidehouse contract. You talk about the $300,000.
I had a little trouble hearing you there. I think you were asking about the Guidehouse contract.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, is that the $300,000 that's there?
Correct. Yeah. And then potentially we also have a legal representative, which is the Voorhees law firm, which potentially could also have expenses there. But that is, yeah, the compliance is primarily the Guidehouse contract.
You talking about the Voorhees that the Shana Fain's program that she's using, the webinar that they do for us? For the
No,
small businesses?
this would be legal opinions related specifically to the ARPA program, which I don't believe we've actually utilized any of those services yet. But
Ms. Goodrich,
So how
you're
much
muted.
is Guidehouse charging us per hour? Can you hear
so
me,
it's
Mr.
yes,
Mr.
I believe
Freeman?
that
I'm
was
just
actually
following up.
provided, and we can get that to you again. The rate varies based on the type of personnel. I believe in the RFP documentation that we sent to council, it actually outlined the various hourly rates of the different personnel that Guidehouse has.
Okay, I'll look for that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Goodrich, I think you were muted there. Did you want to add something? Still not hearing you, Shelley. Don't know. Okay, we'll come back to you. Mr. Malik.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Farragut, for the information. Can we get a copy of that Excel spreadsheet that you shared?
Sure. I will be happy to forward that to council. Yes.
In addition, today we spent, I guess it was an hour and a half going through the first of those 7 presentations, 6 or 7 presentations. And so we're going to be receiving those over the coming weeks, detailing the expenditures we're talking about in this appropriation ordinance. Is council going to be asked to pass the ARPA appropriations here before we have a chance to go through all those presentations?
We are seeking passage next week.
All right. Is there a reason why we can't wait on those until council has a chance to hear the information?
Well, I think we've outlined some fairly, large expenditure categories. The details of what will be provided will fit within, what is being outlined here in this appropriation amendment. As I said, this amendment represents less than 5% of the total ARPA allocation. So this is really just what we think potentially, and I believe it's unlikely that we'll actually spend this full amount before the end of the year. These are placeholders for the categories that have been designated to just really get us through the rest of the year. So, we are seeking to pass this legislation next week, with these kind of broad categories that are really just a pro rata share of, kind of the overall program broken down into these various areas. So, as I said, we are seeking passage next week.
I appreciate that explanation, but I really would just continue to assert that we are putting the cart ahead of the horse in terms of council, right? We are authorizing things and passing things, and then we're hearing information about it later. And that's just an inversion of really, having any kind of input or process. And so I really strongly feel that, really continue to strongly feel that.
Okay.
Okay, I'm not seeing any hands. Ms. Donnell, I would say expect to hear from some of us this week.
Looking forward to it. And we'll get you answers as soon as we can.
Okay, very good. So do I have a motion to refer this item to next week's agenda?
Motion to refer.
Second.
A motion, a second. All in favor, let it be known by saying aye.
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 Okay, very good. We'll refer this item, and we have nothing else to come before us. And we will adjourn at 3:53. Thank you.
Thank you.
That is the final committee meeting for the day. Council will meet at 7 p.m. tonight. Thanks, everyone.